Thank you very much. And let's next take up, we have two bills left this evening. House Bill 5699 by Representative Diaz would require at least one precinct count unit be prepared and delivered to each town not divided into voting districts, and requires the Board of Elections to promulgate rules and regulations establishing the number of precinct count units and voting booths to be used at each voting place. Could we hear from Bob Raposa from the Board of Elections, Jason Martian from the Secretary of State, and Stephen Brown from the ACLU? Bob, if you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. If I could regress for a quick second, I would like to talk real briefly about the House Bill 5701 that was heard earlier tonight.
Which one was that?
That one there was the removal of the demo units, where we were changing the word from shall to may.
Okay.
And this bill was, and the reason I'd like briefly to talk about this, by allowing this bill to pass, which is been at the request of the Board of Elections, the state can bring 39 voting machines back to the Board of Canvassers, which will ultimately save the state $234,000 from not having to purchase additional new voting equipment that will satisfy the House Bill 5699. Currently, the state law in House Bill 5699 allows one voting machine to be supplied to each precinct. We have found that in the 2016 election that there are needs, especially in communities and precincts that have multiple page ballots, that it would become much more efficient if we could provide more than one voting machine to those districts with multiple page ballots, and especially a high number of eligible voters. Also, this bill will allow the state board the flexibility to reduce or increase the number of voting booths based on the election, and that the rules and regs would be created by the Board of Elections to determine the number of voting booths that would be supplied at these elections through when they're being conducted.
So hang on, I just want to make sure I understand it. So you're saying this bill would allow for additional machines, which costs something?
There is a cost, but if the bill H5701 passes,
you'd offset it.
You can offset it.
All right. So I think that both of these bills probably are on the wrong committee. They should probably be in finance for that reason. But let's hear it out.
Okay. So the House Bill 5699, like I said, there would be rules and regs created by the Board of Elections that would have a formula that would determine the number of voting booths that would be supplied to polling places based on the ballots that the voters are voting at in those precincts. The formula would take into account the number of eligible voters, the historical turnout in similar election types, the number of ballot pages, and also the anticipated voter turnout for the election at hand. Okay.
Very good.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you. Any questions for Bob?
Can I just ask, I'm just trying to understand that. Are you trying to say in this that some towns are not divided into voting districts? I mean, it says the top
all towns are divided into...
In each voting district, and for each town not divided into voting districts. That's at least one precinct count unit shall be prepared and delivered by the state board or its designee.
That is, each city and town is a voting district. They have to have a voting district in order to have a precinct.
But isn't each city and town divided into further districts?
Yes.
Okay.
And there is at least one. Like Block Island has one district. I believe you're from South Kingstown area.
Right.
South Kingstown has 12 precincts.
At
which
least,
are 12,
yeah, 12.
Which are 12 voting districts.
Right.
The voting districts are determined based on the census and also on the Senate and Rep combinations. Because every Senate and Rep combination has to have a voting district. You can't have a voting district made up of 2 Senate or 2 Rep districts. They have to be singular.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Bob?
Issues that arise on election day and do a little bit better planning as opposed to being held to one voting machine per precinct. So it gives them the opportunity and the ability, again, as I mentioned, for the most part, voting went smoothly, but there were some situations in some locations where another machine was necessary. And I believe the board had to take a special board meeting or a special vote to actually move another location, another machine into those locations. This would give them the flexibility to assign those machines in advance of election and hopefully allow for a smoother election process across the entire state. So for those reasons, we support the legislation.
Thank you, Jason. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. The ACLU supports subsection A of the bill, which would clarify that more than one voting machine, counting machine can be in a precinct. There were problems, as Mr. Martian noted, in Pawtucket and a few other places because of the lack of more than one machine. We do have concerns about subsection B and completely eliminating any statutory standards for how many machines would be available at precincts. We think there should be some standards in place statutorily. To the extent that some flexibility is needed. We think it's appropriate to give the Board of Elections some flexibility, but again, we would argue, as we argued in a previous bill, in adopting rules and regulations governing those standards, we think the board should be subject to the rulemaking provisions of the Administrative Procedures Act. With those amendments, we would support the legislation. Thank you.
Really pushing that Administrative Procedures Act tonight.
Indeed.
Managed to get it in there, at least 2 bills that I heard. All right, any questions for Mr. Brown? Thank you very much. Kathy Placencia from the Providence Board of Canvassers spent almost the whole night here and then left right before we got to the bill, but I certainly understand that. And Mokitu Sequendo Tai signed up in support, as did Tom Bursford. We have written testimony on behalf of the ACLU, as Mr. Brown said, supportive of provision A, but asking us to keep the statutory minimum in the other parts of the statute.